Welcome to Chartloop's MEDDPICC Foundation Series with Craig Rajpal. Today, we're going to talk about two things. We're going to talk about metrics and about finding your champion within a deal. Welcome, Craig.
Good to be here, Sean, and excited to go on for our third session now.
Yeah, absolutely. So excited to talk a little bit about metrics and building up your champion within your deal. So maybe let's start off with metrics. What are metrics are all about, and how do you come up with them and bring them up in your deal?
I think if you think of the whole MEDDPICC as a whole, right, holistically, if there's one specific attribute that people do not follow or do not really invest a lot of time in, that's metrics. And I also think it's one of the most ignored ones, but also the ones that can have the most consequential impact. At a very high level, metrics are basically all about, before your tool comes in, you've been following the Salesforce analogy for a while now. What is the organizational impact from a numbers, quantitative perspective of having Salesforce and not having Salesforce? So for example, if you want to put a dollar figure on cross collaboration, you have multiple teams, they can't collaborate because they don't have a single system of record. Or for example, what is the value of having the right kind of data or data quality, and putting a number around that. The benefit of metrics is it is information, of course. You always build the metrics in hand with your buyer. That's why we're talking about champion and metrics kind of together today, right? But the idea behind metrics is it's you're putting together a total economic impact, a TEI, for the organization to understand, by having this new solution in place, what the impact is going to be. And on the flip side, where it's really useful is, say, for example, you've done the full metrics analysis, you've put together an ROI, a TEI picture for the organization, and they decide, 2 months before your start date that they're gonna, delay the project by 6 months, right? Mm-hmm. You actually have the numbers to share back at them that, hey, this is the exact dollar figure or a close approximation of how much it's going to cost you if you delay the project by 6 months.
Right. Absolutely. And in what stage of a conversation with a prospect you bring this in? Is this like on your first or second conversation, or does there have to be a lot more buy-in to build together some sort of baseline and case with your potential customer?
It will be the second stage. So for example, the first stage we talked about was really discovery, which was around the identification of pain, identification of initiative, identification of strategic priority, right? Mm-hmm. This is the phase right after, which is the scoping phase. Okay, we understand your pain. Here's the value prop of our solution. Now let's sit down with you to understand your specific environment and how can we configure, our solution to that environment. And while you're going through that scoping journey is when you're really able to kind of, get the details. Okay, what does this cost you in terms of time? Say if it takes your team 15 minutes to identify who the account owner is now on an account, and it's only going to take you 5 seconds after because, you can easily pull it up in Salesforce. How much time, how much dollars, and putting a dollar figure around that. That's incredibly important. And you're doing it in the scoping phase. There's this very common saying in sales, slow down to speed up, right? And I truly feel when it comes to like the scoping phase, it is so incredibly important to take the extra couple of hours, extra couple of days, even weeks to get the information on metrics up front, so that down the line, when you're negotiating with them, when they're thinking of delaying the project, you have an exact dollar figure or approximation to show them, hey, this is how much this is worth to you, and why it makes sense to spend $100K to get $1 million out.
Right. Now, what's your sense on building these this case and the metrics? Do you prefer to talk always about money making or loss prevention? You guys are losing $1 million a month with your current process using this tool. Here's how you'll change it. Any difference to you?
So I think of it in 3 different ways, right? One, of course, if you're selling a product that really leads to increased revenue, right? Touch on that. Everybody can buy into increasing their revenue, right? Second in line right after is cost reduction, productivity gains, right? And the third one, which if you're in the infosec space, you of course know how to put a dollar number on it, is risk reduction, right? So there's primarily three different attributes you can build your metrics around.
Right. Right. So yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, in more traditional industries, you think you'll be a bit of a harder to put a number on a type of ROI?
I mean, you can go with an ROI approach. I think that the key thing with metrics is it's not about if you do a total economic impact, if you put an ROI analysis, if you do a net present value, if you do a you have to figure out weighted average cost of capital. It's not about going into the nuances or intricacies of these numbers. The more important part is you're doing this hand in hand with your champion, and these are legit numbers which they agree to. And in the end, when you're presenting to their leadership, to the CFO, they're saying, yeah, these are real numbers, versus saying, yeah, this is some BS a sales rep at a company put together or a sales team put together. Totally. If that makes sense.
Yeah, so this leads me on right to the next point of who needs to buy in. So you built a case, you built some numbers. With an enterprise deal, you might be speaking to 5, 10, even more stakeholders. So who has to really care about this?
So I think many of the situations that us as salespeople run into it is where they have to justify the project, especially say if it's $1 million and above number, right? You definitely have to put something together like a white paper or an ROI analysis or like a TEI study, right? That showcases why this investment is worth its spend, right? On the flip side, many of the prospects, you might be working with the economic buyer from a get-go, right? Or like second line economic buyer, right? Somebody very close to the budget. And they'll be like, nope, just give me your price, tell me your stuff, I'll figure out the ROI myself, right? I would say even in those cases, while you're scoping out, it's very good to get the metrics upfront, because it's also a key lever you can utilize in the negotiation phase with procurement down the line. So the reason it's important when I say slow down to go fast, it's because if you get all this information up front, so much easier, versus if you're in a hard negotiation cycle with procurement and you're trying to get these numbers, no way they're going to give it to you. So.
Right. And do you, when you're thinking about these numbers, are you thinking about what other numbers are these guys seeing? Like, are these guys shopping around, getting a similar offer from my competitors? Would they actually give you and say, we love your software, your solution, but you're 10% more costly than the second guy? Or is this like very, very kind of customer centric and ignoring everybody else?
So in my opinion, metrics is very much around having, if I think of myself as a king in the castle, right? This is my moat when it comes to procurement, when it comes to negotiation, when it comes to project delays, when it comes to project cancellations, right? Why? Because I have a dollar figure to present to them that, hey, a delay of 6 months costs you this much. Not doing this costs you this much. And in negotiations, when they say, oh, $500,000 is way too much. Hey, well, we're giving you $500 million, we're giving you 5 million back. So that's where this is happening. This is your moat to defend you down the line from all these attacks, which might not be so evident now, but more than likely, if you're doing any kind of deal above 3, 4, $500,000, $1 million above, which are going to become pretty evident.
Right. Love it. No, this is
pre-battle training.
Yeah, I think this is really great, and doing this early on, so this can really arm you throughout, before you get into the trenches of the deal. So you know what's at stake, and you can use this as a lever, as the seller to keep your deal moving. I think that's brilliant.
The other thing where I've used this very effectively in my own sales career, right, is in land and expand motion cycles. Every team that you work with at a company, say if you're working with one line of business out of 30, right, they all want to know what the other teams are doing, right? And if you have a concrete ROI picture to present, man, people love to eat that stuff up, right? everybody wants to know what is going on their neighbor. It's kind of like that. So, having something holistic to present is always a good idea.
Yeah, no, that's really smart, and especially that these bigger businesses, right? Each line of business operates like its own business, right? You need to sell the deal, expand it over and over again. So being prepared with your metrics really is kind of paves the way for that.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And oftentimes, especially I see this with a lot of younger colleagues, right? They've never done ROI analyses before, or never put together like an NPV summary. Just Google it. Literally Google it. I'm not even kidding. How to put together an ROI analysis, or how to capture metrics on a prospect. There's so many useful videos, kind of like this one, right? Which will walk you through the minutiae of how do you go about doing this. That's how I personally learned it. Now I've probably done close to 100 plus different TEIs, total economic impact studies, for my customers over my career, over my years, right? And literally, that's how you run. First draft is going to look clunky and crappy, right? But talk to your team, work together with folks, and you'll be able to transform it. Oftentimes, what I've seen really helpful in my own career is I work with some really excellent sales engineers, right? And they often come with organizations which have also sold $1 million plus deals. So it's much easier to, they've already done this before. So I also take a lot of their help. But if not, oftentimes I'm putting this together myself, right? In some of my former roles I have. Always a great idea to sit down, watch a couple of videos on YouTube. Try something. Your prospect will be the one who tells you if this is useful or not. If it isn't, pretty sure they're not going to spend the time with you on it. If it is, they'll guide you along.
Nice. No, this is great. Okay, we might link a couple of resources or suggestions on an actual template or some ideas around that. But I think this is a great segue into Champion, right? Our next kind of building block within MEDDPICC. So tell me about what is a champion? How do you build one? How do you know you're speaking to the right person and then guiding your way there?
So let me tell you what a champion is not, and then we'll get over what a champion is, right? An intern who started at the company 2 months ago with no authority and no influence is not going to be a champion for your $500,000 transaction, which is very obvious. Maybe this was a little bit of an exaggeration, but I've often seen like how people might have like a junior enterprise architect or like somebody very junior in the organization and call them their champion. That is wrong. Your champion needs to be with somebody who either has influence or has authority. If they do not have either of those, you might have a coach, you might have a contact, you might have an insider, you do not have a champion. A champion is somebody who can advocate on behalf of you when you're not present in the room, or when you're not present in the Zoom meeting, if you will, right? This is somebody who knows the economic buyer or can get to the economic buyer, who has either formal authority, a title, a budget assigned to them, or influence. Think of, in large organizations, think of chief enterprise architects, or think of, sales enablement teams, right? Yep. Think of anybody who holds mindshare within an organization that they might not have formal authority, but they could still be really good champions. On the flip side, anybody with formal authority, VPs, directors, people who have their own budgets, absolutely.
Right. And how do you find, is there a chasm sometimes between the champion who might be, the one who holds the strings on the purse, but they don't own the problem? That, like, if you're selling some sort of server or architecture, they have no clue of that problem, and therefore harder to get the deal across.
Could be. So you're describing a scenario, the champion, because they have a pain, they become a champion. They say pain creates champions, right? So you're telling me, hey, the champion has a pain, but he might not control the whole, essentially control all the moving parts, if you will, right? To get that pain solved, even if they have the money. That's when, the influence part becomes really evident, right? Do they have enough influence to pull in resources from, say, IT or like pull in resources from, say, finance or whatever the line of business involved here is to make it pass through. Let me tell you this, oftentimes there's a lesson, it's a hard, it's a painful lesson that you learn through the years, right? So when we think of our champion, right, we just think, okay, this is probably going to be your competition's champion too. It's not always the case, right? Not always the case. So when building up champions, it's also very important to be cognizant of if person A, and you know it deep in your heart, is your champion, you need to know very deep down who the champion of your competition is. Because if that competition's champion is more powerful than your champion, then, well, let me tell you this, 9 out of 10 times, the competition's bringing the deal home.
Right. And you mentioned building your champion. How does building your champion work? Like, is this a relationship, or do they need to be locked in on you on kind of day one?
It happens over time, right? And I think champion building over the weather is not really it's not really going to help you get a transaction done that takes a year to get done, right? When thinking of building champions, I think more than anything else, in my sales journeys, I meet people who are very much like me, have common interests like me, watch, go Cubs, like, watch football like me, right? And support the Cubs and so forth, right? On the flip side, I'll meet people who don't care anything about those things, right? I think the most fundamental, the foundation to build your champions on is pain and need, a challenge. And that really leads to alignment. If they understand that, hey, this pain, which is which is basically an obstacle stopping me from accomplishing my goals. And if you can align yourself around that pain, if you can kind of run circles around that pain, that's what's going to make you and them a champion. Again, if you're really good at relationship building, hey, more power to you, go for it, right? But at the end of the day, the foundation needs to be legitimate and vested in business interest.
Right. Absolutely. So let me ask you this. So with champions, often at more powerful levels of a company and a larger one, right? So there's different political agendas at play. So let's imagine you're selling some sort of software that automates some processes and maybe eventually will lead to people getting laid off, right? Because things are more efficient. Now you can imagine that, let's say, the COO of this company, their goal is the opposite. They want to hire more people. They want to have more people on their org chart. So how do you kind of manage that, and also going into these meetings and like, okay, there's 3 people here, right? Amy has this agenda, the second person has another agenda, and then position your solution without offending anybody's political agenda.
Yeah, I think that's a very valuable question. Look, it's good to understand the stakeholder map. That is, who sits where in the organization and what their agendas are. Oftentimes, you wouldn't know exactly what each person cares about. You might know your champion, your 5 contacts, your 10 contacts that you're in touch with on an ongoing basis. But if the buying committee is 30 people, which, in a very large size deal that actually might end up being, right? It's good to know what each individual cares about, but then at the end of the day, you have to focus on what is within your locus of control, or what you can bring within your locus of control. And what I mean by that is, if, somebody who's going to be a blocker, or somebody who's going to actually go out and advocate for something else, can you reach out to them and maybe sway them to the side? Oftentimes not, right? That's what I've seen. If not, then the rest is, how do you basically put enough allies next to your champion across other teams that the force on your side is overwhelming enough, or like the force on your side is basically enough to overpower through the obstacles in front of your champions and your allies' path?
Right. No, absolutely. And yeah, and let me ask you this. I mean, what's have you had a deal where you felt like things weren't going in a good way, and then suddenly you were able to build, extend a relationship there, and then that kind of brought turn things around for you?
It's a good one. That's a good one. Let me think of an example. I can definitely give you an example where things were going really rosy, and at the end they took a dark turn, right? So, but let me think of one where they were going bad and how we turned it around by being able to capitalize on champions, right? So oftentimes what I've seen is, and this is, this is something I suffered from, when I was earlier on in my sales career, right? This is something I see new salespeople suffer from. Human beings as a whole have affinity to, basically become attached to one person, right? And that's also true within our sales cycles, right? So you talk to somebody first, you talk to them again, you talk to them 3 more times, and you're like, okay, this person's my champion, right? The issue with that approach is, even though it feels more comfortable because, it's the known versus the unknown, this person, you've talked to them, they feel comfortable talking to you. It's very important for salespeople to be real with themselves and understand if this person that you're in contact with has the potential of being a champion or not. Or a better question to ask is, if this person has the potential to be has more authority and more influence than the champion of your competition.
Right, totally. And let me ask you this and maybe we'll conclude here, but on these dynamics of meetings with potential customers. Often when you're in a room with a lot of people, maybe 3 or 4 people, it's hard to get a point across. So when you're trying to speak do you try to prep your champion and say, like, hey, before the call, let's grab 10 minutes. Here's what's really going on. What do we say to get everybody else to buy in? And then when you come to the meeting, at least one person or your champion. Do you do any of that when you're dealing with champions, or using their insight to kind of guide you through the other stakeholders at the table?
100%. 100%. I would say if you have a strong champion, and say if you're going into a really large product demonstration of your capabilities to a large group, you always do a dry run, and then you maybe do another dry run, and then you go actually do the demonstration with a broader group. So absolutely, if you have a champion, they'll go out of their way to support you. They have to have a selfish interest in making you successful. If they don't have a selfish interest, probably either your champion has way too much free time to keep talking to you 50 times a day, or I don't know the other one, but literally speaking, they have to have a selfish interest in your success. So absolutely, good champions will not only help you prepare and warn you and caution you about obstacles like, say, legal, security, things that have stopped other deals in their in their path, but also walk you through how do you get over those obstacles.
Right. Well, what's an example of your champions building up your champion? Like, is it like their promotion or them growing their team or their budget? What are the typical ones?
So, good example. Let me think of a very good example for you. Very large organization, world's largest professional social network. A lot of people can figure out what I'm talking about here, right? For them, I was working on a deal there. Wasn't massive, 300K, small, medium-ish size, right? And one thing I learned from my own experience was the key interest that the person wanted was he wanted to move away from his current role towards more of an automation architect or an integrations architect role, right? And that was the primary driving interest for him. It'll take you a little bit of time to figure out what is the selfish interest on the other person's side. But now, if he accomplished that goal by showcasing himself as the leader of the automation org for the specific line of business that I was working with, he basically gets a significant bump, definite promotion, right? And gets to move up in the organization.
Right. No, so that's
it actually ended up happening as soon as our deal happened. A couple of months later, the person actually got promoted to run the center of excellence for automations for this specific line of business.
Nice. So it really, understanding what motivates a person really can create a long-standing relationship, and I'm sure there's a lot of respect on the other side, and keeps the door open for a lot more. Yeah. So any other final final tip for sellers on getting their champion in a deal?
There is no magic bullet for becoming friends with people or creating relationships. There is none. If there is, please reach out to me and Sean. We would love to know. Just FYI, because I don't. What I do know works is a common foundation of pain. That is, one of my favorite books, all-time favorite books, is The Selfish Gene, right? That is, human beings, at the very DNA level, are wired to look out for their own self-interest, right? And self-interest has been the driving force of capitalism, of literally any kind of innovation in the world there is today, right? Now, selfish interest doesn't just mean financial selfish interest, it could also mean pride, glory. There's many different ways to think about it, right? I think it's the same way about your champions. They do have a selfish interest. It is our duty as sellers to figure out what that selfish interest is and go, build on top of that. Some books that I would recommend as you're thinking of building champions, Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. I think it's a masterpiece. It's a long one. It's a very long book. It's a couple hundred pages. So it could take
Nobel
and
Prize winner, right? There you go.
That's right, Nobel Prize winner, right? So it's going to take you some time to read it. The other one that I would highly recommend is Persuasion and Pre-Suasion, both by Robert Cialdini. I think they're really amazing books and can talk to you about when initially building champions, right? How do you persuade them that this problem is big enough if they haven't already identified it themselves?
Right. Wow. Fantastic. So we have a lot to go and implement. So we covered metrics. We covered how to build your champion in your enterprise deal. Craig, this was fantastic. Thanks for your time, and I look forward to our next session.
Thank you, Sean. And before we jump off, just one thing. I actually had a lot of people reach out after the last video. And I'm always happy to respond to all of them, all of the LinkedIn emails and messages. Folks, feel free to message us. Sean and I are lifelong sellers. We love helping other people sell better. Feel free to reach out to us. You don't need to ask us if we can help. We do this to help folks out. Reach out to us if you want.
Awesome. Fantastic. Thank you, Craig. Have a good one.